Hi there, this is Len Moss from Glidden Drive. I've been a long-time resident here, and today I'm sitting with a good friend and neighbor, John Brogan. And John has an interesting background both in the world of finance and banking, and also as a man who had some vision about Glidden Drive and saw it through. And we're sitting today at John's property on Glidden Drive. And I've asked the camera to take a look out here. The vista is magnificent.
Tell us what we're looking at.
You're looking at that Sherman Bay?
We're looking at, this is Whitefish Point, and you're looking at Whitefish Bay, and then you're looking at Cave Point, and far in the distance you can see Cane Island.
Oh, yeah.
So that, you're looking at the state park up there.
Beautiful, unspoiled Glidden Drive. And how are you doing there?
Zooming in. There, you can see Cane Island almost. Okay, now we're coming back out.
While that's going on, I'm going to ask John if he could brief us a little on the early history of this beautiful peninsula, and especially this area here, along Glidden Drive and down to Portage Point.
Mm-hmm.
John, who was here originally?
Well, Len, briefly, the history of this area starts with the first presence of Western man, that's Father Marquette and Jean Nicolet. And they came through here and used the Portage Point area where the Indians would portage from the lake to the bay, which is now right next to the Coast Guard station, the canal. And that was 1632. No, 1672 that they came through here. And they were exploring this area for the French, who had established their presence in what we now know as Canada. They called it New France at the time. And then this land changed governance from France to England after the French and Indian War in 1757. And then shortly after that, the Revolutionary War, this land changed, all of this area changed again and became part of the United States under the Northwest Ordinance, which was appended to the Treaty of Paris, where we got our independence from England. And an interesting thing about that, and that affects it to this day, is that the French convinced the Brits convinced Franklin and Adams in the negotiations that they ought to maintain navigation, that the waters should be forever free, because the French sold the Brits on the idea the only thing that was out here was fur. and the canoer and the voyageurs had to get free access, so you couldn't have ownership by property owners of sections of lakes and streams fenced off.
And John,
So-
where was the American native at this time? The American native born?
American natives were, as I understand it, in and around here. They were the Winnebago and what they're now called the Ho-Chunk and the Potawatomi, for which the state park is named. And then there were a lot of transient natives, Americans, who would come out for the fishing season to Whitefish Point, Whitefish Bay.
Yeah.
And they would camp and catch whitefish, net them in primitive wooden twig nets and traps, and they would dry them for the winter, and then they would go on. There's a burial ground up in the park.
American native.
Native Americans. What happened then was Wisconsin was the last of the 5 states to go from territorial status to statehood, and that was 1848. And those 5 states were Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Because the Northwest what the colonies got was the colonies. There are the 13 original colonies in the treaty from England. And then they ceded this area south of the Great Lakes, north of the Ohio, west of the Allegheny Mountains, and east of the Mississippi River. That's the only...
When you say they seized it, what do you...
They ceded it.
Ceded it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the French, or pardon me, the British had gotten this from the French, and then they gave it to the colonies at the Treaty of Paris at the end of the Revolutionary War. Well, there wasn't much here. There wasn't much in some of the colonies, but there was really a lot of nothing out here. And so the first American presence was again fur trading. John Jacob Astor had a factory, a fur factory, a trading post in Green Bay. And Green Bay was the first settlement in the Wisconsin Territory. And so when we became a state, there was 35 million acres. And in the 1820s and 30s, through a series of treaties with the woodland Indians who lived here, the United States resolved their land ownership. It also recognized some private lands that were held by some of the early French settlers in Green Bay and Prairie du Chien. And it then put the following deal together. Wisconsin consisted of 35 million acres. 5 million acres went to the Indians and old claims. So around 30 million acres was government land. It gave 10 million acres to the state of Wisconsin so that they would sell it for internal improvements, roads, pay for a government, and so forth. They retained 20 million acres, which the federal government sold, and gave as patents for services rendered. So a lot of the land up here in Door County was relatively infertile, and some of it was sold by the state and the federal government, but a lot of it was given to Civil War veterans.
So now we're out into the 1860s.
In the 1860s and 70s. And so what happened then was originally the idea was logging. Well, Door County had some pines, not a lot, but it had some pineries. And so you had Whitefish Bay with sand and Sherman Bay with sand, and that would support pines. The shallower soil wouldn't support white pines. what you had was a commercial effort in the middle of the 19th century at logging and fishing.
Fur? Where was the fur?
Fishing.
That-
By that time, the fur was gone.
was gone.
By the 1820s, fur was trapped out.
Tell me about the fishing, because was it fishing that was transported out of this area, and
They would
where would they send it? Down
fish,
to Chicago?
and they would, and all the transportation was almost all of it was by boat.
By boat.
And so you had big lumber docks built in many of these villages along the lake and the bay. You can still see the ruins of the timbers off the great long, I think a 1,000, 1,500 foot long dock that was built out in Jackson Point. You can still see the
Yeah,
timbers. The tops are gone, but the
Yeah.
pilings are there. Well, then the pasture
Let me ask you, when did farming really get underway here? Because
after the Civil War,
after,
but it was pretty primitive stuff. There's only 18 inches average topsoil and so of the rocks. So
yeah,
it wasn't very prosperous. The communities up here were settled basically north of Sturgeon Bay. It was German and Norwegian. The Mennonites settled Ephraim and so forth.
okay.
South of Sturgeon Bay, where the soil got deeper, were the Belgians. And they came over for the same reason the Irish did. They had a famine in the late 40s, 1840s, and so they immigrated.
But how did they pick this particular area? I'm thinking if they came across by boat and landed in New York or Boston, and then what? How did the Belgian community get
the early German and immigrants came here and settled and farmed. He came to Milwaukee and Manitowoc and spread out and farmed these eastern Wisconsin and southern Wisconsin. The first settlers before the migrations were Yankees. The early governors of Wisconsin all came from New Hampshire and Vermont and,
Okay.
and so forth. And so the later immigrants were the Swedes and the Danes and the Norwegians, and they settled more up toward western Wisconsin and Minnesota. But out here, the one resource they had was several: fishing and timber, and very minimal subsistence farming. So the big event, another big event for this area was a bad news for Chicago. It was the
fire?
Chicago Fire of 1872. And the Chicago Fire caused a tremendous demand for lumber resources. So there was big pressure on cutting everything they could cut to ship to Chicago, and particularly pine, in lower Michigan and eastern Wisconsin. And the Peshtigo Fire happened at the same time, far more extensive damage. In fact, the Peshtigo Fire blew burning ashes from Peshtigo, the
Yes.
west side of the bay, all the way over here, and caused some loss of life in this area,
Yeah.
in Russell's area. So that was another impetus for logging. And that logging sporadically went on, even with the hardwoods for the paper mills that were developing in the valley, until the turn of the century. And these areas were pretty well all logged off.
Okay.
So it brings it up to the 20th century, and what you have is this relatively remote geographic area that ended at the tip of the peninsula and was on the way to nowhere.
Yeah.
And so the early road system, in fact, until my grandfather built part of the road system. He was a contractor in Green Bay, and he built part of the road system, became 57. But in the early 20s, the way to get here was to go from Green Bay to Algoma and then up.
Now, John, when did the trains run up through and into this area?
The trains ran up here in a kind of a stub connection of the Green Bay and Western. It was the Onapee and the Western, and came up the Onapee River from Algoma and serviced Sturgeon Bay. It never went further, never went through, because it was on the way to no place, and so it just ended there. And it's my understanding that there was minimal or limited passenger service at all. See, northern Wisconsin developed at the time substantially because the rail system up in Bayfield County and up in that, as far north as that, were much more extensive. They were built to take the timber out, and that was big timber. It took them 40 years to clear cut the northern part of the state.
Let's fast forward into a kind of a personal recollection of your own. As a youngster, were you vacationing up here? Did your family have a place somewhere in the county?
My father had a 20% interest in the Smith shipyards in Sturgeon Bay in 1939, 38. And so we had a cottage out here with his partner Latham Smith on Portage Point, which is on Lake Forest Park. And
is that where the Coast Guard station is?
Yeah, it's the section where the Coast Guard, we were north of the Coast Guard station. And so as a kid, I came up here. Our home was Green Bay, but this is more than a cottage. It was, where my father had business interests and where we had lots of family friends and so forth. And so I got to know this area as a very young boy. And during World War II, most of these roads, including Glidden Drive, were all just gravel. And there was no power.
Oh, sorry.
No,
yeah.
The power on Glidden Drive was only built to your house right near White Pine Lane. That's the furthest the power went. There was no power up there. And there was no power down on Lake Forest Park. We had a log cabin that had electrical service, but it wasn't brought out there because of the copper shortage in World War II.
Was the same true on the other side of the peninsula here?
No, the other side was always more highly developed and popular because of farming was a bit better over there, and those little bayside communities existed as group clusterings of people and so forth. Out here it was always pretty well lonely.
When did the Glidden Lodge appear on the scene?
Well, it gets in the middle of it, but Ewald worked for his older brothers, and they worked for the Schmoke Ice and Coal Company in Michigan City, Indiana. And they came up here working for Orrin Glidden to build the roads through this area.
And Orrin Glidden, he was a developer, or what would you call him?
Orrin Glidden was the most interesting fellow. He was a realtor who had a dream after World War I, and he did very well in the early 20s, and then he had an idea, so that he partnered up with one of the country's largest scallywags by the name of Sam Insel,
Oh, yes.
who had a rather checkered career, and he was the utility king. And among other interests, Sam promoted a railroad called the South Shore Railroad from downtown Chicago to South Bend. And the bondholders and the stockholders they never kept losing money, and they lost their dough and the rest of it. It's now still running as a commuter train. But Sam made a lot of money promoting it and getting land grants from the legislatures of Illinois in the 20s. Well, what he did is Glidden went to Insel and said, this is a story I heard from the Schmolks, said, look, you got some land and this thing is opening up some sand dunes out in Indiana. Let's develop it to the burgeoning middle class in Chicago. They can get there to their weekend house by just an hour's ride on the South Shore. So they bought up the land down there, and sure enough, it was very profitable. They cut up and they platted a place that still exists today in the dunes, in the national park,
Yes,
this sand dune,
yes.
called Long Beach, Indiana. And they had a bunch of 60-foot lots like they planted up here and so forth. One of the things they found out is that unless you put accesses to the water, the inland lots that aren't on the shore develop into trailer trash and, just nothing. So they learned that lesson, and that's why Glidden Drive has these access.
Well, I may have jumped a little forward there, but tell me, where and how did you become involved?
Well,
was it with Ewald?
I knew
Ewald
my
Schmoke?
father knew Ewald. They were friendly. And what?
Now, by now, yes, I went ahead too
Yeah.
fast. How did Ewald end up with this property, this stretch
Okay,
of land?
this is how. First of all, Glidden came up here with Insel in the mid to later 20s, convinced, and they developed Point Beach in Egg Harbor, where all those homes are around
Yes.
near the Alpine. They bought and sold Chambers Island. They had this idea that that would be an elegant place for the yachting community to come up
Yes.
here. And then, on his own hook, he hired a Mr. Klatt, who was an attorney in Chicago, and he had Mr. Klatt take options on all this property. Now, all this property. He essentially, Klatt got under option and Glidden bought everything from T at the south end near the fish house,
Yes.
all the way to Shower Park in the town of Jackson Ford. He
Yes.
bought with the exception of a few families who were fishermen and that lived in Whitefish Bay settlement. He bought 9,000 acres, over 10 miles of shorefront, and Clark's Lake. And they had this idea that they were going to have a little private airport and this, that, and the other thing.
Again, what year are we in?
This is 28, 29, 30.
Okay.
The depression, the market bust, and so Glidden platted out the southern part of what is now Glidden Drive, but he owned all this property. And he hired the Schmolks, who would put the roads in for him
Down in Indiana.
to come up here. And so Ewald was the younger brother who didn't own part of the company, but he worked for his brothers. And so he had a German wife, Babette, and they came up here in the 30s and built these roads. They built the road. They built the road from where the fish house is to Whitefish Bay and beyond past Cave Point and up to Shower Park.
And now through Bark Road, what is now Bark Road?
Bark Road was there.
It was already
Yeah,
there.
they didn't, Glidden didn't own that.
Is that what the fishermen owned?
Yeah, that's
at
what
that
the
time?
fishermen owned, the
Yes.
LEs and Loungers. So Glidden, the trick in real estate is not how much you pay for it, how cheap you buy it, or how much you sell it for. It's how quick you sell it at some profit after you buy it. It's the velocity of the thing. And so Glidden had financial reverses. He was busted. He couldn't pay his creditors. He couldn't pay the Schmokes. In the meantime, the Schmokes, as contractors would do at that time, whenever they were in remote areas, they would have crews that they would feed and put up. You know, that they would board
Okay,
and feed the
yes.
crews. So he, as I understand it, there's a cottage that's left right at Shivering Sands on the lakeside, and that's where they had a camp, you know, to
Okay.
feed the men and so forth. And so in the process, they weren't getting paid. There wasn't much business back in Indiana, so Ewald and Babette stayed here as agent for his brothers. And Glidden passed away in the mid-30s and got to probating his estate. And the probate judge, there were all these claims against his assets. And the judge said, well, the Schmoke brothers have a mechanic's lien, which precedes a mortgage on the property.
Yes.
And so the judge said, made a determination that half of this 9,000 acres was enough to settle the Schmoke's claims.
And so that took
And
place.
so
Yes.
the
What
judge
half
asked
did they get?
the judge asked the Schmokes, which half do you want?
Huh.
And the Schmokes said, well, we'll take the half that goes from Whitefish Bay to the south end and back through the woods and the timber. Because the roads generally stayed there. The roads they built up in the dunes were kind of getting wishy-washed away. So the judge then awarded them this property, and all the woods was it's almost 4,000 acres, I think.
That run up and down Glidden today.
Yeah, and then go back to the farmlands. This
Okay.
is all their Schmoke brothers' property. And the north half was bought by some people from Green Bay. One of the buyers, the north half, which is now the state park, the dunes,
Yes.
the Cave Point, and all of Clark's Lake was bought by some Green Bay investors.
Okay, and then when did you become involved with Ewald with respect to developing?
Well, my dad and Ewald were friends, and in 1956, Ewald's brothers were on in years. He was suffering from multiple sclerosis in a wheelchair, and by that time, Dr. Minahan, who was a rather well-known guy in the area, owned 7 banks and a paper mill and so forth, used to vacation up here and encouraged Ewald to come and borrow the money from the People's Bank of Green Bay to build the lodge, because Babette
Okay.
German cooking and blah, blah. So by that time, Ewald was not even an owner of this land. He arranged to get some property out of his brothers for that lodge site
Okay.
and for the lodge itself. But all this other vacant land until 1956 was owned by the Schmoke brothers,
Okay.
Ice and Coal. And in 56, Ewald told me that in 56, they came up and said, well, we want to straighten out our affairs here, and will you buy it? And Ewald said, well, fine. And he paid him $50,000 because Ewald was in a wheelchair and hadn't sold a lot of lots. Sold some lots in the 30s and 40s, but he hadn't been very aggressive with selling the property. And so he went to the bank, borrowed $50,000 and paid his brothers out, and then quickly sold, got very aggressive in selling real estate.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. And that's where you
And
arrived
so,
on the
well,
scene.
in 50
He went to your father first?
No, he went to my dad, and Dad looked at it, and there's a couple thousand feet here and 500 there and so forth. Dad said, well, I don't know. And so in 58, 59, my father died, but I came back from Madison and went in the securities business, and Ewald was one of my customers. And so in about 1963, I had a pretty good few years in the market and thought, well, I ought to buy some land in Door County. We still owned the
Portage
point
Point.
down at Lake Forest Park. And so
But by 1964, how many cottages were there up and down this lake? I mean, there are some older homes. I know there.
the first cottages were built in the 30s. And then nothing, of course, during World War II.
Right.
And Dave Moyers, who was the vice president of International Harvester, and in those days it took 13 hours, Dave said, to drive hippity-hoppity up Highway Sherman Road, Green Bay Road, up through Racine, Kenosha, Milwaukee.
You mean coming up from Chicago?
Yeah.
Where the international
took 13
headquarters
hours,
were?
yeah.
Oh my Lord.
And and so what happened was nothing much happened. Then in the Korean War, and there wasn't much construction then. Okay. And then into the 50s, and Ewald then in 56 bought this land, and then he sold a lot of the property. So a lot of the homes got built after the mid-50s. And so I went down there one night, and it happened to be just dead lucky. It happened to be the night in January that Mr. Lauser brought the tax bill in, and they assessed what Ewald still owned of the original 4,000 acre tract. He owned 2,800 acres or something. And they brought in this pile of tax bills, and he said, well, it was assessed for $150,000, $160,000, and his tax bill was $1,600, not including the lodge. This was all the
Yeah.
And he was sitting there, and I was talking to him after dinner, and Lauser came in with this bill, and he said, chewing on a cigar, and he said, by God, he said, this ain't worth $160,000. It was 1963, 64, 63, winter 64, January. And he said, I'd sell it all for $100,000. And Babette, with that southern German accent that many of the people will recall, said, Ewald, with 100,000 we could live like kings. And
your ears started to perk.
I'm sitting there in my old Korean War jacket, and and so we made our deal, and essentially what I bought was 7,200 feet of shorefront. I have a picture of that. Laddie is going to take a shot of. And our producer and director and all-around
makeup man,
everything. But it was 7,200 feet of shorefront in a strip on the inland side of the road, 400 feet deep and about 22,000 feet long.
Well, the curves that we all see today, were they all up and down the road, or was it just a
No,
straight
no,
line?
no, no. This was all put in by the Schmokes. It was all for Glidden. In other words, they carved this road out.
Okay.
And the curves generally except at the south end where the lots are 400 feet deep, the road is about 200 some odd feet from the water. And in fact, there were a couple of places that I remember when I was up here hunting in the 50s. I'd hunt ducks up here on the point. That the road went around a clump of trees. Part of it was aesthetics, and part of it was they were getting paid for a road, and Glidden didn't want it. They wanted to be as small as possible, do it as cheap as possible.
Yes. Yeah.
And but why so many curves? There's 93 curves on Glidden Drive. I mean, when you do your surveying point.
Yeah.
But so I bought this. I had a friend of mine, Bill Fairfield, who was writing a book and living at my dad's old hunting shack. And I went back and said to Bill, "I'll give you half of it. You just have to raise $7,500 for the $15,000 down payment."
Yes.
So he did the rest on a land contract, and by the end of the first year, we had sold on land contract more. We started selling land at $30 a foot on the shorefront, and $15 a foot for the inland property. And we sold off, in fact, because Ewald was so casual about, because most of the people who bought land down here before we did had stayed at the lodge.
Yes.
They were guests of the lodge. And so because Ewald was so casual about what talk to people about, and when we bought that 7,200 feet of shorefront was all rock except one sand lot at the south end. It was all the lots that he didn't think he could sell, because
Yeah.
And so what we did is we said to everybody that we went to the courthouse and laboriously teased out all the property owners' names on the drive and sent them a letter and said, introduced ourselves and said, well, we don't know who, and Ewald can't remember who he made any commitments to. So we're going to give you 90 days, and this is the price we're going to sell the property for. But Ewald was selling property on the inland side at $9 a foot and on the shore at $25. And so we'll honor any adjacent property owner who wants to either buy inland and back of his land or next to him at that price. And some of them, a couple of them did, but some of them said we were just a bunch of high-binding real estate musclers and thought we were outrageous, and and thought this was awful, awful, awful. $30 a foot is terrible, terrible travesty. And so I was all right. By the end of that year, we had sold over $150,000 for the property at that price, and less than 20% of the property was bought. So we were free and clear.
Yes, you were free and clear with 20% sold,
and we paid off Schmoke, and that's
how it all started.
Yeah.
And the access roads?
The access roads, we simply extend, the ones we put in were the 6-foot walking accesses to the shore for two reasons. Number one, that continued to give value to the inland property, as Schmoke had put all the accesses at Schmoke Glidden had put those 60-foot outlots down to the shore and the southern end of the drive.
Okay.
You'll notice that all of our accesses start north of, Lanny, what is that? What's that?
Oak Lane.
Oak Lane. Oak Lane was the.
Wide. I don't think you created that, did you?
No, all the accesses north of Oak Lane we created so that you get attractive properties on the inland side. What we did for the inland lots is we carved lots that were essentially 200 by 400 feet deep. And on the shore, the depth of course was set by the road, and the average frontage was 165 feet.
Were you getting advice from any professional groups as to
No,
how to manage this or how
Bill-
to set up the
Bill and I
development?
had been on Gaylord Nelson's staff, and so we were familiar with some of
Okay.
the conservation issues that were raising their head in the 1950s and 60s. And so we felt this would be would give value, and in retrospect, looking back over the last 40 odd years, I don't think we hurt anybody.
No, I think what eventually evolved out of here, was good vision, and
Well,
to see both sides of the road develop the way they
and
did.
Schmoke continued to sell that conservancy property in back of the inland lots, and he sold all of that off, and that's now in, conservancy. The Nature's Conservancy owns a block of it in Dick Bodwin, and so it's not developed.
Very good. Well, John, I want to say
How about
thanks
that?
for sharing your history here of beautiful Door County's favorite side. We call it the quiet side,
It's
right?
the quiet
John?
side.
This
That's
is the
right.
quiet side, and it's spectacularly beautiful here today, looking again at the sand and the beautiful stone beaches. Oh,
Okay.
okay, John, I can recall myself first coming into the area here in Door County back in the early 60s. And I was struck by your comment that the lots were being sold here originally by you. There was $30 a running foot on the lakeside and $10 on
$15.
$15 on the innerland. Now, where and when, what served? Was it more than accessibility, or was it a combination of accessibility and maybe
When this is
the media catch up with it at some point?
No, this is what happened. When I bought this property, the peninsula generally, this area included, was with pockets of St. Louis people generally up here. Aside from that, the people who were up here were some Chicago, some Green Bay, some Milwaukee, and some the Valley. It was kind of a mixture. But in because of the transportation issue. It gradually, from the 30s, took 12, 13 hours to get from Chicago up here. By the 60s, that was down to 6.5 hours. And still painful going through small towns and so forth. Well, in 1967, Wisconsin, 10 years late, got federal monies and put the interstate highway system through Milwaukee. It had been around it before that time.
That would be I-43?
That would be I-43 going north. And so that cut the 6.5 hour travel time down to 5 hours. Well, when that happened, prices doubled in all of Door County in the fall of '67. So instead of going west of Milwaukee and up 41 and so forth, you could come directly at least to north of Milwaukee, but you then still had to go down State Highway 42 through the small lakeshore communities. The other thing that struck here was there was a feature article in 1964 in the National Geographic. And I don't know, 10, 15 pages of the issue were devoted to the wonders of Door County.
Right.
And so that got a lot of national attention to it. But the real estate prices really jumped when the first highway got through Milwaukee, of course, ending on the north side. Then in the mid-70s, the interstate, the divided highway, the state and federal government built 43 outside of the old corridors of 42 and 57. They split up the middle, and so you could get on the interstate in Chicago and get to Door County and cut another hour and a half off it. You could do it in 4.5 to 5 hours. Well, doubled again. So
When you say double again,
the real estate prices doubled again. I don't think we'll see that big an impact, but we will see an impact this fall or next year when the interstate finally gets from Green Bay up to Sturgeon Bay. So effectively it means now that you'll be down to 4 hours.
From Chicago.
From Chicago, from the north side suburbs to up here. Recognizing that, I'd been appointed to the DNR board in 1975, and we could see what was happening, the state could, to real estate in these attractive vacation areas. And we had the department, before I got on the board, had outlined a possible state park in what was left of the dunes that hadn't been sold off, which was the old the north part of Oranglen. And so I was jumping up.
You said that was not sold off. What do you mean? That
the Green Bay investors bought it,
yes.
Sold off Clark's Lake, sold off some shorefront, but the high dunes
right.
hadn't been sold because the original investors had all died and they had never broken the property up, so that the heirs had 19 people had to sign off on a particular parcel, and they just never did. And so the state had that designated as a park, but they never moved ahead with it. The department didn't. So I jumped up and down and said I wouldn't vote for any more small outholding acquisitions until they dealt with the dunes portion of the Whitefish Bay Dunes Park. They did, wound up in condemnation. The state bought it. Well, the state paid $575,000 for 10,000 feet of shorefront
Wow.
in 1980. And based on current prices, it would cost him over 80 million to buy the.
John, we're glad you jumped up and down at the right moment.
Well,
That's for sure. Right.
but again, the great impact up here on property values and on the mixture of people was transportation access, the interstate highway system, and now Door County, north of Sturgeon Bay and south, have become more and more Chicago people.
Very good. John, there was some talk, and it's always been a little confusing to me. There was what appeared to be a road running from one section down by Goldenrod Lane here. There appeared to be a road that was running up north that was running right alongside the water on some of the early maps. Could you tell us what was going on there?
Yeah, the Glidden and the Schmokes in the 1930s came up with Glidden Drive, and then when they got to what is now Goldenrod, they went out to the lake and along the shore on that south point to Sherman's Bay, and then back in at what is now Whitefish or White Pine Lane. Well, the lake is not to be tempted, and it tends to go up and down. In fact, it's peak to low average around 6 feet, 5.5 feet. And they built the road when the lake was down, lake came up, bang, the road went out. Well, they didn't try to reinstitute that. The other thing about they just simply went back in the woods and cut the drive through where it is right now. The history of the road is interesting. It was a private road, of course, when Glidden had it in the 30s. Ewald was on the county board and he was town chairman. And so they had, in the 30s, they dedicated the road to the township. And the county had a north-south road further in the farm country. So Ewald did a swap. So the county then takes Glidden Drive, names it County Highway T, and the township got the better improved road with less maintenance costs. It was just
Everybody won.
Everybody won.
Win-win.
The county didn't, but and so that's why this is a county trunk, and that's why it was not deeded. It was an easement road, so that's why this road is narrower than a normal county trunk. It is much wider, more twisty than a county trunk, but yet the county must pave it, plow it.
I'll ask one final question with respect to the road. It was designated a rustic road, and I'm not sure exactly. Was that back in the 70s?
That's back in the 60s. My partner Bill and I worked on that. The rustic road designation is a state designation, and it simply means that it's on the state tourist maps. It's one of the more scenic roads, like there's Highway 35 in western Wisconsin that parallels the Mississippi River, and so it gives certain protections in that it's more difficult for the local units of government to start widening it and straightening it and so forth.
Very good. Well, I think it's time for us to wrap this up, but I want to say thanks, John, on behalf of Glidden Drive residents for your contribution not only today, but back through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And it's time also to say thanks to Laddie Chapman, who's been working away on the camera over here until and I also think he may even be the producer. Our thanks also goes to Channel 19 for what we believe is an interesting topic, Glidden Drive. Thank you.
Thank you.